this afternoon, I've been asked to do a presentation for people who are in a big organization who are getting ready to make a change. They're getting ready to leave that organization and go out into the world and look for jobs. In the specific context this afternoon, it's people who are in the military getting ready to go out and find jobs in the civilian world. I've also done it for people who are in big companies who either on their own or against their will are being pushed out into the world to find their next opportunity. And it's interesting because as a veteran and a VP at a Fortune 100 company, I can tell you there are a lot of very clear parallels between the two situations. So this recording is for you, whether you're a military person about to become a veteran, or whether you are in a big organization, usually as your first or mid-career kind of role, and you're looking to do something very different. And so the point of this talk is why it's difficult to make that jump, and 3 things I think you should be doing right now to get ready to make that jump. So let's dig in. First, why is this hard? Well, I can speak from my time in the military and then my time at Dell specifically. Two different situations. One military becoming civilian, one big company becoming not big company. In both of those situations, the U.S. Air Force and Dell, we had a language all our own. We called things certain ways. We had certain codes that everybody knew. We had certain numerical values assigned to our jobs that everybody knew. Everybody knew which leaders were good, which leaders were idiots. Everybody knew which middle managers were good, which middle managers were nitpicking morons. We knew all that stuff because we focused exclusively inside our organization. I was at Dell during one of the most tumultuous times in tech, and I never talked to anybody outside of Dell. It was very rare. I almost always was talking exclusively to people inside Dell. Same with the Air Force. When in the military, I pretty much only talked to people in the military or that I met through my job, who were vendors I was negotiating contracts with. So as a result, when we think about the outside world, we think about it exclusively through the lens of our current organization. And that's something really important to remember as you start to think about ways to sort of branch out beyond that organization. So you know that it's hard. You also know that you have to be ready to be open to different ways of calling things, to understand that people aren't going to necessarily know what your job was because you tell them your job title or your job code or your level. You're going to have to be ready for that. And you're going to have to help them understand what value you can create. Because the honest truth is nobody really cares what job level you held, what your responsibilities were, who you reported to, etc. They care about the value you created, the accomplishments you had, the teams you made real and made valuable. They care about that because that's the best indicator that you're going to be able to do that for them. The fact that your job was to be the deputy chief of this function for this geography, the only thing that's meaningful there is the geography, because if they need somebody in the UK, they're going to know that I lived and worked in the UK. So, maybe UK is valuable in that. Nothing else is. So the good news is, all of it. So you can start translating it. So if I were in your shoes, and I'm looking down because these are my notes, I tend to speak from a series of notes to kind of keep me on track, but I don't have a script. So the very first thing I would do, there are 3 stages. If I were you, who's in a big organization getting ready to make a jump, there are 3 things I would do, and this is the order I would do them in. First, you want to gather intelligence. Then you want to make connections. And then you want to find and fix the gaps in your resume. We're going to talk about those in order. Okay? Gathering intelligence. One of my favorite stories is somebody invariably will walk up to me at a networking event, or I'm doing interviews for a client or whatever else, and they'll say, I really want to be in tech. or I really want to be in software, or I really want to be in the cloud. Awesome. Cool. Well, I worked for Oracle for a number of years. Who? Oracle, the $60 billion software company with 160,000 employees, the Fortune 100 software company that does tech and the cloud and medical records and you name it. Oh, well, what product do they have that I would know? And I say, well, obviously database, middleware, they have a number of applications that run back office. They have Java. Java, I know Java. Okay, then you don't want to be in tech. You basically want to take programs on your home computer and somehow make money. That's what you've told me by not knowing the primary companies in the field you're talking about. You should know that big players in the cloud are Amazon AWS, Google, Microsoft, Oracle, and others. You need to know a lot about the industry you're trying to go into. That's absolutely critical. So how do you get that? Well, the first thing is you have to know your goals. Because if you don't know what your goals are, you don't know what you're gathering intelligence about. Okay, fair enough. So in the civilian world, in the world outside your big company, your next promotion, your next job isn't clear. It's up to you. I mean, the freedom is great, but freedom comes with a lot of responsibility for making your own choices. So what I tell my clients as a coach is when you are taking control of your life, I believe you always need to have 4 plans at any given moment. Plan A, B, C, and D. Goal A, B, C, and D. And goal A is your irrational goal. It's your dream goal. It's this. If money were no object and I could do anything I wanted, I would do A. Now, here's the thing. I've hired, coached, and managed hundreds of people. Every single person who was successful in life had an irrational dream goal. And every single person who was a failure thought it was stupid. I don't know why that is. I will tell you, after learning that, I went from being one of the people who thought it was stupid to one of the people who had an irrational dream goal. It costs you nothing. Think about what you would love to do if money was no object. That is your plan A. That's your goal A. Cool. That's the truth of it is you have a vanishingly small chance of making that happen as your next move. But if you don't know what your dreams are, you don't know where you're headed. You're aimless. So plan B is, okay, what would be a stepping stone towards that amazing dream goal of mine, but a lot more realistic? So let's say my dream goal is to run a resort on one of the Hawaiian Islands. Well, that's my plan A. Plan B is if I want to do that someday, I'll need to know how to run a resort. So maybe I get a job running a resort around me, someplace close that I can build up that experience to know if I still want to do the plan A. Disney, when they were getting ready to put Disney World in Florida, they borrowed a hotel from somebody in Orlando and then ran that hotel for a year to figure out what are the rules that we want for running our own hotels. So you do the realistic thing on the road to your big goal. That's your plan B. Plan C is more of the same. You're doing pretty much this. You'd like to do a little bit more than this for a little bit more money. That's a perfectly valid plan C, and that's what a lot of people go for is their plan A. And then there's plan D. Plan D is, it can be best summed up, if you see me doing X, it's because I needed money really bad. And again, a lot of successful people have a plan D. A lot of unsuccessful people don't. And so plan D is kind of that ultimate fallback. If you see me waiting tables, you're going to know that I need to pay the bills while I get my plan C back on track. Or if you see me doing my plan D, it's because plan A is right around the corner and I just need to build up some experience at it. So those are kind of the 4 levels of goals. Now let's kind of take your plan C, your goals, kind of doing what you do today, but for a little bit more. Plan B could be, I want to pivot into a new industry and do pretty much what I know how to do, but there instead of here. Okay. You know kind of what you're going for. Then what you need to do is start building intelligence. And you build intelligence two ways. There's what I call the boomer millennial way of doing it, where you call people and talk to them. There's the Gen X, Gen Z way, where you rely exclusively on research online. And you have to do both, because you're not going to find out all the nuances online, which is where I would start my research. But you'll know enough to know who Oracle is, who are Oracle's big competitors, who are their partners, what do they do? You'll know who's Blue Origin, what do they do? You know, what's the mission? What's they're trying to achieve? Who are their partners? Who are their vendors? You'll know about Ford Motor Company. Okay, they have been trying to make this big push into electric vehicles. What does that mean? You start doing your research. You start reading articles. Then what you have to do is add to that knowledge you get from your online research with talking to people who can help shine a light on your knowledge. So an example, I would really, again, an A goal for me would be to really do something meaningful in virtual reality. You know, augmented reality. You wear a headset and suddenly you're seeing, you're looking at an airplane and suddenly you're seeing through your headset all the parts and how to fix them and all of the data you need flowing through that augmented reality. That is very cool to me. So I started doing some research online. And I found who are the big companies, who are the major players, who's doing what. Terrific. But then I started talking to people. And at least in my geography, what I found was it is a very closed ecosystem. Basically, the only way in my geography is to have been doing it for a major defense contractor or somebody like that for a number of years. And then suddenly you can have it into this group. That's all cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But it kind of helped me understand how realistic is my A goal. Okay. So you get on the phone and you talk to people. So I went to a couple of conferences and I talked to people and I found out, yeah, there really is a need for, if you want to get into this industry, you have to either completely retool, re-educate, or you have to go to work for a company for a number of years and build up credibility in this tight ecosystem. Okay. Kind of starting over. Not really what I want to do. So that kind of took the shine off of the A path for me on that. Fortunately, I have other irrational goals. But it's an example of, I did all my research online. I figured out who the key people I needed to talk to were. I then went and had a conversation with them and very quickly got the reality. And some people will tell you, push through that, keep going. And that's fine. It just wasn't for me in this scenario. But it's an example of, you're going to do your research on the plan that you want to attack. And then you're going to start talking to people. Because one of the things that I'm really trying to get across to people in big organizations going out into the world is something I felt when I exited the military. Nobody is in charge out here. Meaning, a job that you do for company A pays $80,000 a year. That same job with the same responsibilities for company B pays twice that, pays $160,000 a year. Why? No idea. It just happens to be that way. Nobody's in charge out here. You'll go through 13 interviews to be considered for a job at a company. And then you find out that job never existed. They were just doing those interviews to scare their current employees. You can be as mad as you want, but nobody's in charge out here. Or you have a verbiage around what you do today. You know how to explain it using the language of your current company. But you go to a trade show and you try to explain what you do to somebody who doesn't know your current company, and they couldn't care less because they don't understand what you're talking about. You're using very specific language about your big organization that they can't be bothered to translate for you. Nobody's in charge of it. There's no system. There's no simple, you submit a resume, a human looks at it, gets excited about you, calls you for an interview, you do the interview, you get the job. That process broke down about 20 years ago, and it broke irretrievably when humans stopped looking at the resumes and applicant tracking systems and now AI systems are looking at the resumes. It all broke down. Nobody's in charge out here. that doesn't mean what you want can't be gotten. It just means you need to go about it a different way. So when you think about how you talk about what you do, when you think about your resume, touched on this a minute ago, nobody cares what your duties are in your current job. They care about the results you accomplished. And you need to think about the type of job you're going for, the type of goal you have in the context of the type of results you can achieve. Now, what does that mean? When you're thinking about your goals, you need to think about, do I want to work for a big company or a small company? Do I want to work for a very established company or do I want to work for a startup? Do I want to work in public sector or in commercial business? Do I want to do sales? Do I want to do finance? Do I want to do legal? Do I want to do delivery, operations, transportation? Do I want to do marketing? What is the flavor around the goal that you have? And then when you're thinking about that, think about what they need. What defines success for a marketing team? What defines success for a delivery team? You're going to find that out by talking to people. You're going to find that out through research. And then you're going to think about what in your background shows that you'll be able to have that success. What in your background are accomplishments that will be meaningful to the person who's running a 100-person cybersecurity company? And, you have been doing cybersecurity at Amazon, and you've been working on huge systems as part of a massive team of 300 people. And, you have some accomplishments. You were cybersecurity person of the month, 3 months in a row, whatever that is, right? But then you want to go and interview outside of Amazon to a local cybersecurity company of 5 or 10 really smart people who have a company of 60, 70, 80 people around them, and you want to go work for that company. Well, what are things that are going to be the definition of success for your target company? Because they're not going to be able to throw bodies at a problem. They've got to be smart about how they apply their resources. They're smaller, which means they have to be more nimble, which means they have to be a lot more efficient. So when you think about your successes, you need to translate them into successes that your target company can understand and care about. And cybersecurity person of the month on a 300-person team, 3 months in a row, it says something. It means you stood out from 300 people. But why? What did you do that made you that paragon 3 months in a row? Because the assumption might just be you were really good at glad-handing the boss. And that's useless in a small organization. It could be very useful in a large organization. All right. So you know what your goal is. You know the kind of job you want. Now you've got your intel. And the beauty of it is you've started by gathering intel to go to the second step of my 3-step model, and that's make connections. The first time you reach out to people, you may be reaching out for information. Take my venture into augmented reality. I reached out and I made some really solid connections of people who gave me some good information that kind of helped me understand what the reality was of my goal. Okay. By doing that research and gathering that intelligence, I changed my goal. I found out that wasn't really for me. I wanted to do something else. Perfect. That's all part of gathering intel. But let's say I had gathered intel and I'm like, okay, I'm more convinced than ever I want to do this. Well, you've already started a conversation with people who gave you that initial advice, who now you can go back to and say, hey, thank you for all that help. I've really done a lot of thinking. And I see a lot of things I've accomplished in my career that could be very helpful in augmented reality, in cybersecurity, in fulfillment center management, in landscape architecture, whatever it is. You've now decided, you've gathered your intel, you know who the players are, you know who your targets are, and you're starting to do the second step of the model, make connections. And that is absolutely critical, because the last thing you want to do is blow a connection because you don't understand something fundamental about your business. Think about these people who told me they wanted to be in software, but didn't know who Oracle was, barely knew. When I was quizzing them a little bit more, I'd say, so, okay, maybe you don't want to work for Oracle. Oracle's more enterprise software, enterprise services. Do you want to work for a more consumer-focused company like Meta? And they're like, who? I said, Facebook. They're like, right, I know Facebook. Imagine what that does to my willingness to introduce them to anybody. They haven't done the very basic research about the thing they say they want to have happen. So frankly, I'm kind of blown as a potential connection for them, which is sad because I know a lot of people I could introduce them to if they were willing to put in the work. But I'm not willing to put my credibility on the line if they're not willing to put in the work, if they want it handed to them. Because remember, nobody's in charge. There is no process. There is no system like at your big company or like in the military. So the next thing to think about, I like to talk about small business versus large business. You're going to hear a lot, depending on who you talk to, that small business either employs a low end of 50% or a high end of 85% of the people in the country. A lot of it depends on how you define small business. And that's cool. The reality is small businesses employ at least half the people in the country. Perfect. But like with any simple statistic like that, you have to go and do the research. And what you're going to find is the vast majority of small business in this country, something like 27 million of them, have just one employee, the founder. Okay. That founder probably, unless the situation's unusual, that founder may or may not be looking to hire anyone. Usually not. By and large, the companies you're going to go for are between 2 employees and 500 employees. That's kind of the generally accepted definition of what a small business is, usually south of 500 employees. A lot of it depends on the industry, but that's a good, I think it's a good sort of number. That's cool. There are 650,000 companies in the United States that fit that definition. They're from 2 to 500 people. But what I'll tell you as somebody who's been in a ton of startups, even those one-person companies could be looking for a co-founder, could be looking for a co-owner. They may have become so successful doing their thing, they're ready for another person to jump in and help them. So as you think about your goals, if you're looking for the illusion of security, if you're looking for big company, big benefits, then you're probably looking at large businesses and you want to go down that path and you want to think about how you sell yourself to that audience. But if you want to be more on your own, have more freedom, and potentially have more success, more on that in a second, small business may be for you. And it's a totally different way of selling yourself. Remember, the goals and the results you want to talk to them about need to be something relevant to them, as opposed to, here is my resume. It contains exclusively all the language from my previous big employer. If you were really smart, you'd understand how Google talks about things. You'd understand how Dell talks about things. Oracle talks about things. The United States Marine Corps talks about things. They don't care about your background and your language. They care about what they want. So your job is to make it easy for them to see how what you can do will give them what they want. Because remember, there is no system that's going to force them to pay attention to you. It just doesn't exist. So that's cool. You know kind of what your audience is, where you're going, and you start to make connections. Now, one of the things I'll tell you, and I teach a lot of classes on networking, 99.9% of the people you run into at an event, even an event in your industry, can't help you. That they are not a hiring manager who needs you to do a job on their team they have open and budget for. 99.9%. I've been to a lot, both as a hiring executive and as somebody who'd love to get hired. One time in all the years I've gone to these things, did one of those connections directly turn into a job. I met somebody at an event who then hired me to do a job for them. Doesn't happen. The way it works is the people you're talking to know somebody who can help you. So your goal is to connect through them to that person they know. Now, why would they want to connect you? They don't know you. They may not even like you. A lot of us don't come across good at networking events. So why would they be willing to make that connection? Well, it's not for you. It's for the person they know. Every time I go to a networking event, I'm shopping. I am shopping for people that the half dozen or so really good friends I have who I know have current needs. I'm looking for people who might meet their needs. I have one really good friend who runs a cybersecurity company. I'm looking for opportunities or employees for them. I have one really good friend who is an architect, and I am looking for, more on the commercial side, I'm looking for opportunities to connect her to, mainly through like investors or whatnot, who could select an architect. So when I go to these things, I'm shopping for the people I know. Now, I'm a lot more intentional about this than most people. But if you'd ask most people, hey, would you be willing to introduce me to this person you know? They're going to say in their own head, maybe. Maybe I'd be willing to make that introduction. Why would they want to know you? Well, I can take a business like theirs and double its value. Ooh, okay, you've got my attention. Or, well, I was the deputy chief of architecture for the Corps of Engineers in the Southwestern District. I don't know. I don't know if my friend needs somebody who has public sector engineering background. That's more of a stretch. See, that's the difference between what your role was and what you achieved. So let's say you had that Corps of Engineers job. You could say, while I was in my last role, I did a huge amount of research on how to protect commercial structures against disaster. Wow. Okay. That may be a very valuable business for my friend to get into. Let me make the introduction and let you and her figure out, is there any value there? See the difference? You've taught me enough about you that I'm willing to talk to her. That's what making connections is all about. And you've got to go into it intentionally. And what I would suggest is, the reason I always go looking for who can I benefit is because if you go into a networking session or any kind of conversation focused only on what you need to get out of it, you're going to come across as grasping or even desperate. So what you want to do is think, instead of how can I get what I want, what I suggest is thinking, how can I be of service? Because if you're of service, I find they will want to help you get what you want because you've already helped them. Now, in most people who aren't sociopaths, it creates oh, wow, you really helped me there. I can now really help my friend, the architect. What are you doing again? Who else do I know who you might be able to help? That's what making connections is all about. Now let's go to the third and final piece. And remember, these are just the three things I'm saying. If you've got like 3 to 6 months to go before you leave your current role, you're going to go out into the marketplace, or unfortunately, you're one of those people who was suddenly shown the door in your last role. There's a third piece that while you're doing your research, you're gathering your intelligence, you're talking to people, you start to make connections. They're going to help you spot the holes in your background that are going to keep you from getting what you want. And in a lot of cases, you will have opportunities to fix those gaps before you really need to start showing up and doing interviewing. Now, a couple of my favorite questions, particularly when I'm interviewing mid-career people or people just exiting the military. My absolute favorite for people just exiting the military. Tell me about a time when you have had to get results from people that you could not fire or discipline. Remember, in the military, everybody's subject to the rules, and rules have the force of law. And if you disobey your boss, you can go to jail. Bad things can happen to you. So what that does is it gives people in the military sometimes an artificial sense of how they got things done. And I'm probing that with the question, tell me about a time that you had to get something done with people that didn't have to listen to you and frankly could quit anytime they wanted to. I have stumped more people, especially mid to senior people, coming out of the military with that one question. So let's say I just hit you with that. You're thinking, holy cow, I don't have an answer to that. You have a gap. Because in every civilian company you're going to think about, nobody has to do what you say. Insubordination is so 1985, right? Especially with Gen Z and with a lot of the ways work happens now. You can give orders all you want, but insubordination is really seen as your failure as a manager to properly motivate the employee. So now you're coming with an insubordination charge. They were insolent to me. Nobody cares. What HR is going to ask you is, well, what have you failed to do to properly motivate that person? Ugh, that's a tough one. So how do you address that gap? Well, again, let's take the military, then we'll do a big corporate example. In the military, what I would say is focus on your volunteer efforts. Like, let's say you ran a scouting troop, or let's say you did a project with a group of people like volunteers. Volunteering is a phenomenal way to address gaps. You can launch into, you ask an interesting question, because in the military, I'm used to making decisions, giving orders, and being responsible solely for the outcome. Let me tell you about the scouting troop I ran, where I had to have 75 scouts and roughly 150 parents. And in my military mindset, it was chaos. And let me tell you how I dealt with that. Phenomenal answer to the question. Another one that I've used in my background was, well, when I was in the military, I was in the United Kingdom for 4 years, and most of the people I worked with and who theoretically worked for me were Ministry of Defense. If, as an American military person, I had a problem with them, I couldn't talk to them. I had to go to their, basically, what I would call a union representative on base, convince the union representative that they were bad and they needed to do something. Now I'm having a three-way conversation, and bluntly, nothing ever happened. So in those situations, I had to get results from people who could quit anytime they wanted and didn't have to listen to me. Boom. Great answer. That answer has gotten me a couple of jobs. So that's an example of finding a problem in your story, in your resume, and then taking action to fix it. Let's say you don't have a current volunteer thing. Go volunteer and do something. Fix the gap in your resume. Now let's take a big corporation. There's a problem that I call VP disease, or VP syndrome, Vice President syndrome. And that is, and I've been a vice president at a Fortune 100 company, it has been so long since you did anything yourself that you view the majority part of your job as delegation. The way I ask the question is, in the last 6 months, tell me about something that you have had to do completely on your own. You couldn't delegate it, and tell me the results you achieved working by yourself. Well, that's a tough question for a lot of middle to senior managers in big companies, because their favorite button in the email program is the forwarding. Ooh, who am I going to get to do this? Bob. Bob doesn't have enough to do. Boom, Bob's getting some new work. Here's your chance to shine, Bob. That's great. In a big corporation, when you've earned the respect that people will listen to you, you're seen as the person who can kind of get the right person connected to the right work. But especially when you're going for a smaller company, they need you to be able to achieve results and lead people. And so having an answer to that, that's another potential gap in your resume that you want to address. Now, one thing that I suggest there is, let's say you're an engineer and you've been promoted to engineering management, which means you haven't gotten to do any real engineering in a long time. There's nothing stopping you from going to a makerspace or building something in your garage or, something outside your job that you'll be able to talk about. That's completely within your control, and it creates a phenomenal answer. So the answer, if you're an engineer, okay, you've been an engineering manager for 10 years, tell me the last engineering thing that you did by yourself and what the results were. And you say, well, as you can imagine, as an engineering manager, my job is more about motivating and leading my people. But like most engineers, I miss actually doing engineering. So let me tell you about this project I'm working on. If you're an electrical engineer, let me tell you about this thing that I'm building at the makerspace. If you're a civil engineer, let me tell you about the work I'm doing with Habitat for Humanity, where I actually go out and help design and build things. Just translate that gap in your resume to a success, and it doesn't have to be through your job. Some of the most impressive successes are things where you identified your own gap and then went and filled it. And frankly, if you're not willing to fill the gap in your background, kind of like me with augmented reality, I'm still thinking about selling it because I'm excited about it and I could communicate the value of it, but building a company to do it, the gap in my resume is too big for me to comfortably fill. And you have to be realistic about that. And then you loop back and revisit your goals. So you're considering making a big move, or you're not considering it, it's already happened. 3 things that I would suggest that I work with my clients on right now. The first is figure out what your goals are. What are the things you want to have happen next? And then translate those goals into gathering intelligence. That's all that first thing. Gather intelligence. Be in command of the information around what you want to have happen. And be comfortable with it. Be fluid with it. Do the work and be able to show that you've done the work. And then it's not just online research. Talk to people. Case in point, a good friend of mine works for a big accounting firm. And I was really excited about doing business development for that accounting firm because I know that piece really, really, really well. And they told me, that's really cool. You'd be phenomenal at it, but realize that's 1/10 of 1% of the revenue for this big accounting firm. We can't afford somebody like you to deliver that tiny scrap of revenue. We just do it because our big customers insist we. Look, okay, well, I found out online they do it, but that intelligence gave me the reality check around that opportunity. So it kind of, okay, well, who do you know who that is the majority of their business? Oh, yeah, well, the reason we had to start doing it was because we started losing big deals to this other accounting firm where it's 10% of their business. You should really go talk to them. In fact, I know somebody over there. I'll introduce you to her. See how that works? That's gathering intelligence, step one. And that never stops. If it's truly your dream, gathering the intelligence around it is fun. If it's not fun, you may want to revisit whether that's your ideal irrational goal. A, B, C, D. All right. D, your goal D, your fallback goal, that probably shouldn't be fun. The whole idea is that's how you pay the bills while you're trying to make something else happen. So that's first step, goals and intel. Second step, make connections. You'll start making connections as you're gathering intel. Cool. But once you've gathered your intel, you'll make more valuable connections as you're starting to try and make things happen. And approach those connections from a mindset of, what can I do to help you? Instead of, what can you do to help? Then finally, you started making connections. You're going to start getting a lot of advice and feedback. If you hear more than a couple of times, oof, I could really introduce you to people, but what you need to be hired in this job is this thing that I don't see on your resume. Well, you can't make stuff up. Today, that's all too easy to find out. What you have to do is say, okay, what can I do to really fill that gap in my resume? Especially if you have 6 months. Who can I volunteer with? What would be a compelling way to show that you're absolutely right? You need that to be successful. You need that to be hired. Here's what I've done and the results I achieved. It just wasn't through my job because my job was something else, but it was very much a success and it was up to me to achieve it. And I did it through volunteering or a hobby or a trip that I took or, an advisory gig that I did for a friend's business. So many ways that are within your control to make something like that happen. You just have to want to, and then you have to take the action, and then you have to be confident in telling the story about it. So we're going to have a Q&A afterwards. For this video, I'm going to put it up online. Do me a favor, in the comments, let me know if I've missed anything or if you have any questions or you have any situations that you'd like for me to kind of give you ideas on how you can remedy them. A big part of what I do for my clients is I work with them first on what their goals are, then what they need to know and who they need to connect with, and then how they need to tell their stories so people understand what they're able to do. Thanks for listening.